All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're diving into something that, well, it kind of flips what a lot of us think we know right on its head. We're going to look at some incredible new research on cannabis and, believe it or not, the aging brain. So let's get right into what the science is starting to tell us.
I mean, that's a wild question, right? For decades, the story about cannabis and your brain has been pretty consistent. But now, a huge new study is making us ask a totally different question, at least when it comes to older folks. So could the very thing we've linked to cognitive problems actually protect or even turn back the clock on our brains as we age? Let's dig in.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at what most people think about cannabis. Then, we'll explore why new questions are popping up specifically about aging. After that, we'll go inside the massive study that's behind all this, reveal the really surprising brain pattern they discovered, and finally, we'll zoom out to look at the bigger picture.
Okay, first up, let's set the stage, because when we talk about cannabis, you've got two completely different stories going on at the same time, and this research sits right in the middle of them.
So, on one side of the coin, you've got the story we all kind of know. For years, especially when looking at younger people, studies have linked cannabis use to, well, a bunch of negative things. But, and this is a big but, a totally new question is starting to emerge, driven by some unexpected science. Could that same exact substance actually protect the brain in older adults? It's a total contradiction, and that's exactly what these scientists wanted to get to the bottom of.
And, this question isn't just coming out of nowhere. It's really being pushed forward by two major trends that are happening at the exact same time.
So here's the deal. First, keeping our minds sharp as we get older is a top concern for pretty much everyone. At the same time, older adults are actually the fastest growing group of people using cannabis. I mean, the numbers are kind of surprising. Almost 12% of folks between 45 and 64 say they use it. And here's the crucial part. Scientists are thinking, hey, maybe the way cannabis affects an older brain is fundamentally different from how it affects a younger one.
So, you have this huge, complicated question. How on earth do you even begin to answer it? Well, you need data, a lot of data. And that's where the powerhouse behind this research comes in, the UK Biobank.
Look, for a long time, the research here was kind of all over the map. You'd have one study say this, another say the complete opposite. A big reason for that? The studies were just too small. They didn't have the statistical muscle to find a clear signal. So to really figure this out, you have to go big.
And when I say big, I mean, we're talking about almost 38,000 people. That's how many participants from the UK Biobank were part of this analysis. A sample size like that, it lets you see patterns that would be totally invisible otherwise. Their method was actually pretty straightforward, but really powerful. First, they grabbed all this data from that huge group of adults from age 44 all the way to 81. Then they looked at their fMRI brain scans, specifically how the brain works when it's just at rest. And finally, they just crunched all the numbers, comparing the brain's wiring between cannabis users and non-users, and looking at how that all stacked up against age and how they did on thinking tests. Now, the key thing they were looking at is something called functional network connectivity, or FNC. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a traffic map for your brain. It's not just looking at one single spot, it's measuring how smoothly the traffic flows between all the different districts of the brain, how well they're all talking to each other. Okay, so they've got this massive data set, they've got this powerful tool to analyze it. So what do they find? Well, this is where things get really, really interesting. And honestly, a little weird.
What they found was something they called a reversed brain signature. So check this out. In people who didn't use cannabis, the data showed that as they got older, the communication between certain key parts of the brain actually increased. Okay? But in the cannabis users, the communication between those exact same parts went in the opposite direction. It decreased. It was like a perfect mirror image, a totally opposite effect on the brain's wiring.
And this wasn't just some abstract thing happening in the brain scans. It actually lined up with how people performed in the real world. The study found that the older cannabis users did better than the non-users on 6 out of 9 different cognitive tests, including things like fluid intelligence and memory for numbers. So that younger-looking brain signature actually came with better brain performance.
Okay, so these findings are pretty wild, right? So what's the big takeaway here? What does all this mean? And maybe more importantly, what doesn't it mean?
The researchers summed it up really well in their conclusion. They said that these results suggest that the cannabis users in the study showed brain patterns that you'd normally see in younger brains, and that this went along with better cognitive skills. The idea here is that maybe something in cannabis is interacting with the brain in a way that helps it hang on to that younger structure as it ages.
Now, hold on. Before we all jump to conclusions, it is so important to talk about the limitations here, things the researchers themselves are very clear about. First off, and this is the big one, this shows a connection, a correlation. It does not prove that cannabis causes these effects. Also, this was just a snapshot in time. They didn't follow people for years. And while the differences were real, they were pretty small. And finally, they only looked at folks over 44, so we can't use this study to say anything about younger people.
So in the end, this study doesn't really give us a final, neat answer. What it does is crack open a really fascinating new door. The idea that one substance could have such different, even opposite effects on the brain at different times in life, it forces us to ask a much bigger question. It makes you wonder, right? If this is true, what else do we totally not understand about the whole aging process? It just goes to show you there is so much more to discover.